I stopped sending my father $680 a week. 6 days later, he filed a missing persons report. I opened my banking app at 11:47 on a Friday afternoon. I was sitting at my desk in the second bedroom of my apartment, the one I used as a home office, the one with the window that looked out over the parking lot and the row of ash trees that had gone bare for winter and not yet come back. There was a cup of Earl Grey tea on the corner of the desk, still steaming, and my laptop was open to a client spreadsheet I had been meaning to finish since Tuesday. I had been sitting there for about 20 minutes, not really seeing the spreadsheet when I picked up my phone instead. I scrolled to the standing transfer. I read the line that said, "Next scheduled. Tomorrow, $680 to Gerald Thackeray." I sat with that line for what felt like a long time and was probably 45 seconds. Then, I tapped cancel. The app asked if I was sure. I pressed confirm. The screen updated. Next transfer, none scheduled. I set the phone down face first on the desk next to the small handwritten ledger I kept in my kitchen drawer, the one I had brought to my desk that morning because I had been looking at it more often than usual lately, the way you keep returning to a thing you know you need to deal with. The ledger had a column for dates and a column for amounts, and a column I had labeled, somewhat grimly, running total. The running total was $106,080. I did not feel relief. I did not feel dread. I felt something closer to the quiet that settles in after a sound has been playing in the background for so long you stop noticing it. And then it stops, and the absence is so loud you almost miss the noise. My name is Tamsin Thackeray, and I am 24 years old. And what happened in the 6 days after I canceled that transfer is something I have turned over in my mind many times since. The way you turn over a stone that surprised you, looking at the underside of it, trying to understand what was living there the whole time. The number $106,080 is what $680 a week for 156 consecutive weeks adds up to. I know that because I had built the spreadsheet in the second month of sending the money, when I realized it was not going to be a one-time thing, and that I was going to need to track it for reasons I could not yet fully articulate to myself, but that had something to do with the feeling I had always had that nobody was keeping score, and maybe someone should. I grew up in Fairfield, Ohio. Small city. Big enough that you could be anonymous, but small enough that certain things had a way of circling back. My father, Gerald Thackeray, worked in logistics for a regional distribution company from before I was born until I was 17, when the company restructured, and his position was one of the ones that went. He was 54 at the time. The years after that were a series of contract positions, some that lasted a season, some that lasted a year, one that became something close to steady for about 20 months before that company was acquired, and the contracts were the first thing cut. My mother died when I was 13. An aneurysm on a Wednesday morning in February. She was in the kitchen making coffee, and then she was on the floor, and by the time the ambulance came, there was nothing left to do. She was 41 years old. Her name was Patricia, and she had dark hair and a very practical way of looking at problems, and she used to sing to herself while she cooked, half under her breath. Not songs you would recognize, just melodies she seemed to be inventing as she went. After she died, it was the three of us, my father, my brother Callum, and me. Callum was 4 years older and had the particular armor of an older brother who had decided that the way to survive a grief-filled household was to be useful and then to leave. He was useful. He mowed the lawn without being asked. He drove me to school on the mornings my father couldn't get out of bed, which in the first year happened more often than I want to remember. And then, when he was 22, he left, moved to Pittsburgh for a woman named Darcy, who he would eventually marry, and built a life there that was genuinely his own. I did not leave. I was 18 when Callum moved, and I was not ready to leave, and then I was enrolled in a 4-year accounting program in Columbus on a combination of loans and a small scholarship, and I was gone during the school year, but I came home in the summers, and I came home at Christmas, and I kept coming home the way you keep going back to a place that needs you more than it deserves. My father had not offered to help with my tuition. I want to say that plainly and without resentment because I have spent enough time feeling resentful about it, and I have learned that resentment held too long starts to feel like furniture. It just becomes part of the room, and you stop seeing it. He had helped Callum with 2 semesters of community college, the years before the layoff when money was different. By the time it was my turn, the money was not there. He told me that at the kitchen table on a Sunday in October of my junior year of high school, the year I was starting to think seriously about what came next. He was proud of me, he said. The money just wasn't there. I took out $29,400 in federal loans. I worked 2 jobs for most of my 4 years, a dinner shift at a restaurant near campus 3 nights a week and a weekend position doing bookkeeping for a small dental practice whose owner had a preference for paper records and a slow adaptation to digital systems. I graduated in 4 years. I passed my CPA exam on the first attempt. I started at the firm in Columbus 11 months after graduation, and 6 weeks into that job my father called on a Sunday evening and told me the electric bill was 3 months behind. I sent the $300 that night. Electronic transfer immediate. I thought it was a one-time thing. The next month he called again. A different bill, a similar amount. I sent it. The month after that it was his car registration, which he had not budgeted for and which was due in 6 days. I sent that too. By the 4th month, I had set up the standing order, $680 a week, which is what I had calculated, somewhat imprecisely, as the difference between what my father's irregular income covered and what his basic monthly costs required, divided into weekly increments so it felt more manageable to me. I did not think of it as a permanent arrangement. I thought of it as a bridge.
Bridges are supposed to end.
I do not think my father was calculating. I do not think he sat down one morning and decided his daughter was a resource to be managed. I think he was frightened, genuinely, quietly, persistently frightened, in the way that people who have seen their financial stability collapse once become frightened that it will collapse again, and that fear made him reach toward what was reliable. I was reliable. The transfer was reliable. The fear of its absence was, I would eventually understand, more motivating to him than almost anything else in his life during those years. The trouble with fear, when it is the engine of a relationship, is that it has no natural stopping point. Fear does not become satisfied. It just looks for the next thing to be afraid of losing. At Easter of the year I turned 24, my father said something at the dinner table that I have thought about nearly every day since. We were at the house on Collinwood Road, my father at the head of the table, Callum and his wife Darcy across from me, and my father's neighbor Ray filling the corner chair he had occupied at family dinners since his wife passed 3 winters ago. My father had made his baked ham. I had driven 2 hours to bring a green bean casserole in a ceramic dish my mother had owned, the one with a small chip on the rim that I had always been careful not to chip further. Darcy had brought scalloped potatoes. Ray had brought dinner rolls from the bakery on his street that he always brought, and that were always very good. Callum had been talking about an expansion at his job, regional accounts, something about a new territory. My father was listening with the particular attention he gave Callum's work updates, leaning forward slightly, nodding with what I can only describe as pride in advance, the way people nod when they are already certain of the conclusion before the sentence is finished. That's what I'm talking about, my father said. That's a man building something real. He raised his glass. We drank. Ray said, "What about you, Tamsin? How's the firm treating you?" My father answered before I could. "Tamsin steady," he said. He cut into his ham, without looking up. "Callum builds. Tamsin writes checks." He said it the way you say a thing you have said so many times it has lost its edges. Not with viciousness. With the flat certainty of someone who has categorized a person and considers the categorization closed. I did not respond. I cut my green beans into thirds, an old habit, something I had done since childhood, a way of giving my hands an occupation when I needed a moment that my face would not betray. I finished my plate. I helped Darcy clear the dishes. I thanked my father for the ham. I drove 2 hours home. That night I opened the spreadsheet. I did not cancel the transfer that night.
I want to be honest about that.
I opened the spreadsheet and I looked at the running total, and I sat with it for a long time, and then I closed the laptop and went to bed. I did not cancel it the next week either, or the week after that. It took me 11 more weeks, 11 more transfers, another $7,480, before I pressed that cancel button. I tell you that not because the 11 weeks matter to the arithmetic, but because they matter to the truth of what it is to know something and not yet be able to do the thing the knowing requires. My coworker Nora was the first person outside my own head who knew what I was thinking about. Nora Vasquez had worked at the firm for 3 years when I arrived and had the cubicle to my left and the quality, which I came to depend on, of asking the right question at exactly the right moment without seeming to be trying. She did that on a Thursday afternoon in the middle of January, about 6 weeks after Easter, when she came back from the break room with 2 cups of coffee and set one on my desk without asking. "You're doing math that isn't a client's," she said. I had been staring at the ledger, which I had taken to keeping in my desk drawer at work along with the one at home. I closed it. "I'm fine." "I didn't ask if you were fine," Nora said. She sat down in the extra chair she kept next to her cubicle for this kind of conversation. "I said you were doing bad math." I looked at her for a moment. Nora had a way of making honesty feel like less of a risk than it usually did. I told her the basic shape of it, the transfer, the 3 years, the running total, the dinner table. Not all of it, not the full number. Just the shape. She was quiet long enough that I thought she was deciding how to respond diplomatically. Then she said, "What do you think happens if you stop?" "He'll call," I said. "Then he'll be confused. Then he'll be angry. Then Callum will call me." "And you're afraid of that?" "I'm afraid," I said, "that I'll answer the call and just transfer the money anyway. Because that's what I always do." Nora nodded slowly. "The problem with automatic things," she said, "is that you have to unautomate them on purpose. It doesn't just stop by itself." I thought about that for the rest of January and all of February. The Friday I canceled the transfer was the second Friday of March. Clear, cold morning. I went to work. I came home. I made my Earl Grey tea in the copper kettle on the stove and took it to my desk, and then I picked up my phone, and I did the thing. The rest of that Friday was quiet. My father texted at 6:14 p.m. "Transfer didn't come through. Everything okay?" I read it. I set the phone down. I did not answer. That was the first time in my adult life I had read my father's message and chosen, deliberately, not to respond. The habit of responding to him went back further than the habit of the money. It went back to the years right after my mother died, when I would hear him in the kitchen late at night, and I would get up and sit with him because I did not know what else to offer, and being present felt like the only useful thing I had. The response habit was older than the transfer habit and harder to break, which is why I sat on my bathroom floor that first night for almost an hour. It was 9:43 p.m. My back was against the side of the tub. My knees were pulled up. The Earl Grey tea I had brought in with me had gone cold on the back of the toilet. I had my phone in my hand, and I had opened my father's contact 3 times and closed the app 3 times. The apartment was very quiet. Here is what I was afraid of in that quiet. Not that he would be angry. I had anticipated the anger and made my peace with it as a price I was willing to pay. What I was afraid of was that I would hear his voice, and it would be enough. That the old gravity of it, the particular frequency of his voice saying my name, would be enough to tip me back into the groove I had spent 11 weeks trying to climb out of, and I would transfer the money before the call was even over, and I would feel both relieved and ashamed, and we would never talk about what had happened, and next Friday there would be another transfer, and the one after that, and the running total would keep growing. Some kindnesses are loans the lender forgets they're keeping. I was afraid the loan had become, in some quiet internal way, the relationship itself. That what I had been telling myself was love and obligation, and family was actually a financial arrangement that had taken on the shape of those things over time, and that if I removed the money, I would find there was less underneath it than I needed there to be. I stayed on the floor until 10:22. Then I stood up, poured the cold tea down the sink, made a fresh cup, took it to bed, and read until I fell asleep. Day 2, nothing. Day 3, 1 voicemail. "Tamsin, it's Dad. Call me when you get a chance." His voice was measured, the confusion not yet converted into anything harder. Day 4, 2 texts and a second voicemail, this one longer, the confusion beginning to sharpen at the edges. He said he hoped I was all right. He said the transfer had never missed before. He asked if something was wrong at the bank. Each escalation was polite, but the accumulation of them told me something about what the transfer had come to represent in his understanding of our relationship, not as one of many things between us but as a primary channel, the main line, the thing whose silence meant something was broken. Day 5, Callum called. I let it go to voicemail. He said, "Hey, Dad says he can't reach you. Just checking in. Call me back whenever." His voice was easy and unalarmed, which told me my father had not yet told Callum the nature of what was happening, had framed it as a welfare concern rather than a financial one. I had lunch with Nora on day 5 at the diner 2 blocks from the office. Red vinyl booths, bottomless drip coffee, a laminated menu that had not changed in at least a decade. I told her about the voicemail count. "He's escalating," she said. "I know. 5 days feels like a long time to him, I think." 5 days is nothing, Nora said. I didn't call my mother for 3 weeks once. She mailed me a card asking if she'd done something wrong. Did she? Nora considered this over her coffee. Probably. She set the cup down. Have you figured out what you're going to say when you do talk to him? I've been working on it. What's the version you keep discarding? I thought about it. The version where I explain everything. The full number, the Easter dinner, all of it. The version where I lay it all out and wait for him to understand. And why do you keep discarding it? Because I don't think he'll hear it that way. I think he'll hear an accusation. And then the conversation will be about defending himself instead of about what I actually need. Nora nodded. So, what do you actually need? I looked at the window. Outside, people were walking in their coats, heads down against the cold. I need him to know I'm not available in the way I was. And I need that to mean something other than abandonment. Those are 2 different conversations, Nora said. You can have one now and one later. I thought about that through the afternoon. Day 6 was a Saturday. I was at my kitchen table at 9:18 in the morning, working through a freelance tax return for a small landscaping company, when I heard 2 knocks at my door. Official, unhurried, the knock of someone doing a job. I opened the door to a woman in a Fairfield County Sheriff's deputy uniform. She was in her mid-40s, practical brown hair and a neat bun, and she had the expression of a person who had been dispatched to handle a situation she considered mildly absurd, but intended to handle with full professionalism. "Miss Thackeray," she said. "Yes. I'm Deputy Pauline Dresch. I apologize for bothering you on a Saturday morning. We received a welfare inquiry yesterday evening from a Gerald Thackeray in Fairfield. He indicated he'd been unable to reach you for 6 days and was concerned about your welfare." She looked at me steadily. She was clearly waiting for me to confirm what she could already see. "I'm safe," I said. I stopped returning his calls. I should have told him I was going quiet for a while. That's on me. She nodded, just barely. The nod of someone whose suspicion has been confirmed. "Would you like me to convey any message on your behalf?" I thought about it. I thought about the dinner table in Fairfield, my father's voice saying Callum builds, Tamsin writes checks. I thought about the bathroom floor and the cold tea and the phone I had opened and closed and opened. I thought about what Nora had said. 2 different conversations. "You can tell him I'm safe," I said, "and that I'll be in touch when I'm ready." Deputy Dresch wrote something brief in her notepad. She clicked the pen closed. Then she looked up at me with a directness that I appreciated. "Miss Thackeray," she said, "this isn't the first call like this we've handled. It usually isn't what people think." I wasn't sure what to say, so I said, "Thank you for coming." She nodded once, walked back down my front steps, got into her cruiser, and pulled out of the parking lot. I stood in the open doorway for a moment. The morning was cold and clear, the particular quality of March air that smells like the ground is starting to make up its mind about spring. I stood there until the cruiser turned out of sight. Then I went inside and finished the tax return. My father called at 2:07 that afternoon. I answered. "What is going on with you?" His voice had the quality of a person who had been genuinely frightened and was expressing it as anger, because anger was more comfortable to inhabit than fear. I recognized the register. I had been hearing it my whole life. "I canceled the transfer, Dad," I said. "I should have called you directly instead of going quiet. That wasn't the right way to do it. But I canceled it because I needed to." "We had an arrangement, Tamsin." "We had a habit," I said. "I'm not sure it was ever really an arrangement. An arrangement would have had a conversation at the beginning." Silence. "Then, I called the police on you." "I know. Deputy Dresch came this morning." "I thought something had happened." "I know you did." I kept my voice steady. "Even. I think part of you is also frightened because the money stopped and I wasn't reachable to explain it. I think both things were happening at the same time." Another long silence. You think I only called because of the money. I think you called because you were scared, I said. I think the money stopping was part of what scared you. I don't think that makes you a bad person. I think it tells us both something about what we'd built. I had spent 6 days, in the margins of working and sleeping and sitting on the bathroom floor, thinking about what my father's fear was made of. He was 61 years old. He had watched his professional life contract twice, once in the layoff at 54, and again in the acquisition that killed the contract work 3 years later. He was living in a house that needed maintenance he couldn't always afford. He had lost my mother before either of them were old. He had watched Callum build something in Pittsburgh that was stable and self-sufficient, and he had watched me become stable in a different way, and I think somewhere in that watching he had reached for what was reliable and found the transfer, and the reaching became expectation, and expectation became entitlement, and entitlement, when it is challenged, converts very quickly into crisis. I did not think he had planned it. I thought he had been afraid for so long that he had stopped noticing the fear, the way you stop noticing a sound that has been running in the background for years. The transfer was the thing that kept the fear quiet. Without it, the fear became audible again. A family will tell you blood is thicker than water until the day blood asks them to give something up. I don't know what you want me to say, he said. The anger had gone out of his voice. What was left was something older and less certain. I don't need you to say anything today, I said. I need us to have a different kind of conversation when there's been time, about what you actually need and what I can actually give without disappearing in the process. What does that mean? It means I'd like to figure out what our relationship looks like when money isn't the main thing in it.
He was quiet for a long time.
I didn't mean what I said at Easter, about Callum. I know, I said. But you said it. That was where we left it. Neither of us angry, exactly. Neither of us resolved. Just two people who had been in a pattern for 3 years acknowledging for the first time with words that the pattern existed. The weeks after that call were complicated in the specific way that real things are complicated, not dramatic, not clean, but layered in ways that took time to sort through. Callum called me 2 days later. I answered this time. We talked for 2 hours and 19 minutes, which was longer than any phone call we had had in years, possibly ever. I told him the full number. I heard him go quiet on the other end of the line in a way that was different from his usual quiet. $106,000, he said. Give or take. Tamsin. He paused. Why didn't you tell me? I don't know, I said honestly. I think I thought it was mine to carry. I think somewhere I believed that carrying it alone was part of the job. It wasn't your job. No, I said. It wasn't. Callum and Darcy had a conversation I was not part of. A few weeks later, Callum told me he had spoken directly with our father, a real conversation, the kind they apparently had not had in years, about what the actual monthly costs looked like and what a reasonable contribution from Callum might be. They had arrived at a number together. It was not $680 a week. It was something smaller and named and agreed upon by everyone involved, which made it a different thing entirely from what I had been doing. He also said, carefully, that he thought he had made it too easy not to look at. That leaving for Pittsburgh when I was 18 had felt like escape at the time, and in retrospect was also, in some ways, a transfer of its own kind. He had moved the weight of the thing onto me and called it independence. I told him I didn't hold it against him. You probably should a little, he said. Maybe, I said. I'll let you know. I did not resume my transfer. I want to say that simply and without apology. I made no further standing payments to my father's accounts. That was a line I had drawn, and I did not move it. What I did do, 8 weeks after the Saturday morning with Deputy Dresch, was drive to Fairfield on a Sunday with a ceramic baking dish of Darcy's scalloped potato recipe, which I had asked Darcy to share and had spent a Saturday afternoon learning to make properly. I sat at the kitchen table on Collinwood Road for 3 hours. My father made his baked ham. We talked about things I did not know we could talk about. My mother's habits in the kitchen, the way she used to hum those invented melodies, a photograph he had found in a shoebox the previous fall that he showed me on his phone, a trip the 3 of them had taken before I was born. He showed me a bookcase he was building in the garage, just framing so far, rough and unfinished, but something he was making with his hands because a neighbor had offered to teach him. I had not known he was interested in woodworking. There was no reason I should have known. The transfer had structured our relationship around a monthly arithmetic, and arithmetic does not leave much room for the kind of information that makes a person legible as a person rather than as a recurring obligation. The small handwritten ledger is still in my kitchen drawer. The last line reads, March 8th, final transfer. I look at it sometimes when I'm getting something out of that drawer, and what I feel is not what I expected to feel. I expected to feel either the relief of resolution or the residue of something unfinished. What I feel instead is something quieter than either of those, something that has to do with having made a decision that was mine to make and having made it, finally, and having lived with the making of it long enough to know it was right. I worked on this with Dr. Yemi Adisa over the better part of a year. She had a small practice 2 miles from my apartment, and a directness I found useful. She was the one who gave me the word parentification for what I had been doing in the years after my mother died, and later the framework that helped me understand how the parentification had connected, without me quite noticing, to the transfer years. She was also the one who said something once that I have returned to many times, that the most expensive bill in a family system is the one no one agrees to pay. Forgiveness is not access. Understanding is not reunion. Compassion is not a key to my front door. Those are sentences I wrote in my phone notes after session with Dr. Adisa and have not deleted. Love that asks you to fund it without naming itself is not love. It is management. Saying no did not make me cruel. It made me responsible, to myself first, and then, in a way that surprised me, to him. Because the conversation we had after the police came was the most honest conversation my father and I had ever had. It was not comfortable, but there was something real in it that the 3 years of Friday transfers had not been able to produce. Family without respect becomes entitlement, and entitlement grows teeth the moment you build something it cannot control. The thing I built was just my own life. Just a quiet apartment, and a job I was good at, and a ledger with a final line in it. But it was mine, in a way the previous version had not entirely been, and protecting it turned out to require less drama than I had feared and more steadiness than I had known I had. If you have ever sent money or time or energy to someone who never named what it was, who let it accumulate into assumption, who called it family and meant something more like guarantee, I am not here to tell you what to do. I canceled a transfer. You might do something different. You might need to. But I want to ask you something, honestly, before I stop talking. When did you decide that the cost of belonging was you? Not a portion of you, not an occasional inconvenience, but the full weight of you on autopay every Friday, without a conversation about whether that was what you had agreed to? Because I spent 3 years not asking that question, and then 11 weeks knowing I needed to answer it, and then 6 days on the other side of it before I understood what I had actually been afraid of. The fear was not that the relationship would end. The fear was that I would discover it had never quite been what I thought it was. And if that fear is familiar to you, if you recognize the number in your head, the habit you've stopped questioning, the transfer that has been running so long you've forgotten it was ever your choice, then maybe the question worth sitting with is this. What would you find if you pressed cancel that has been there the whole time, waiting to be something true?